gone. Many mature nations, intelligent nations, are moving away from it. I've got a bit of West Coast DNA in me, and I can remember back into the 80s and 90s when the West Coast Accord came up, and that wasn't quite good enough, and we eventually said that the logging of native forests on the West Coast just did not stack up. And there was the threat there of, well, we'd undermine not just the local West Coast economy, it would be the national economy. We needed that resource. Look, we needed to build New Zealand with good old hardwood plus softwood. But of course we saw past that, and now the West Coast thrives on ecotourism. People go there because of the natural beauty, and the landscape is now the dividend maker for not just the West Coast but all of New Zealand. So I can see past any argument that might say that we are users of fossil fuels and therefore we cannot shy away. Those arguments are so shallow now. They don't stack up at all.
Councillor Darby, you've just about exhausted, well, you have just exhausted your time. Could you please just sum up, please?
Thank you. And so this is an opportunity to grab climate change by the scruff of the neck. So let's back a stronger statement in the submission. Let's not shy away. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much,
Point of order.
Councillor.
Point of order.
Point of order, Councillor Quacks.
I move that the motion now be put.
Do I have a seconder for that?
Why would you do that?
Seconded. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's a procedural motion, so I'm required to put that motion without debate.
Sorry.
Sorry, I am reminded that we have not had the opportunity for anybody... Sorry, I'm speaking at the moment. Take that in a moment. We have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers for the amendment, but none against. So before I actually accept that, Councillor Quacks, I should, under standing orders, see if there's anybody against that wishes to speak. Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I was down on the speaking list, I believe. So I take the position that the councillors who have spoken before have rightfully positioned themselves on. Climate change is a reality. The impact of human life forms on this planet is maybe coming to a tipping point. But the issue is finding the solutions. If you look back in our very recent history, how quickly we are moving away from petrol cars and diesel trucks. Composite materials and new technology have enabled jet aircraft transporting ever-increasing numbers of people to reduce the need for jet fuel by 30%. So to turn our back on a potential new industry, new technologies, to remove our ability to capture some of that uplift, to give us a higher income base for our population, using this country's and this city's entrepreneurial flair and ability to do things, might be a retrograde step. Council has taken a consistent, precautionary approach, a reasoned approach. One is not just shutting the door on potential opportunity. Oil may very well be a thing of the past for propulsion means, but will it be a thing of the past for new age materials, for composites, and for the future reality for us to actually combat climate change, animal extinction, and our own very survival on this planet? It's not as simple as an emotional reaction.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak against? Councillor Lee, you're speaking against the amendment?
I wish to speak for the amendment. Mr. Mayor,
No,
I'll be very brief if I can.
No, order. I also want to speak for it, but I can't because we have a procedural motion I have to put first, but I can only put that procedural motion after I've accepted a second person to speak against.
Okay, can I just speak to
this
that?
under a point of order?
Point of order on that. If 3 speakers were for or against, it does enable a procedural motion to be put. However, there's no grounds for a procedural motion to close off the
Sorry,
debate on that right now.
Councillor, there's
Read
no
your
debate on a
standing orders,
procedural
Mike.
motion. No, please, order. I am asking if there is any other person that wishes to speak against the amendment, as I'm required to do. If not, I'm going to put the amendment. Can I just draw Council's attention to the change in wording that has been agreed by the mover of the motion, and that relates to the financial benefits relating to overall economic benefit relating to Auckland rather than New Zealand, because I think I welcome the fact that that amendment is made. We have heard that there will be an overall economic benefit to New Zealand, but not to Auckland. So this, I think, states the case more accurately and powerfully from our point of view as an Auckland Council. So with that change...
By division.
Sorry, I have a procedural motion, but I don't think there are any other speakers, so you may not wish to... You just want to leave it?
Mr Chairman, the procedural motion does require a vote.
Yeah, okay, I can put it, but there are no other speakers, so it's slightly redundant. It's been moved that the motion be now put. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary?
No.
I'll have to do a show of hands on that. All those in favour of the motion being now put, please raise their hands. Seven. Those against?
Lost.
1, 2, 3.
Sorry,
It's been lost, so we now move back into the debate, and I have on my speaking list waiting to speak, I've got Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So back to the issue in hand. First of all, I want to warmly thank our staff for the preparation of this submission. These are not people who are apologists for the oil industry. They're simply people who've presented us with the information we've requested. There's been a huge amount spoken about this, and I will be supporting the amendment, warmly supporting the amendment. And along with Councillor Clow, Councillor Cooper and Chair Presland, we were proudly members of Waitakere, the eco-city. So, Councillor Darby, not all councillors turned their back on climate change. Some of us have been working to address the issue of climate change for 24 years. So in doing that, this is a critical but political amendment. It doesn't address the issue that government are asking of us, which is to merely submit and hollowly submit on a process that I think they have absolutely no intention of listening to. I voted for the submission in the first round because I thought we were genuinely engaging. We were proved incorrect in that. I voted politically the second time around to say, how about we just don't do this, and I certainly will be voting that way again. The bottom line, however, Mr Mayor, is the way that we actually message this. If the amendment does go through, I think we need to link it very clearly to the Auckland Plan, to the C40 agreement, and we also need to link it very clearly to the moves that we are making to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel and car use. I'm lucky enough to be able to cycle to work every day, and I do. However, we will still need to make some major changes, and the bit that I worry about is we can feel that we're squeaky clean, however we're still condemning other countries to the coastlines being put at risk, their fauna and flora being put at risk, and our environment being put at risk in countries or for other coastlines. So I think we need to not simply pull up the ladder and say, haven't we done well with what we've done today? We need to message solidarity to other parts of the world who are facing this risk every day. Well done, Councillor Casey, for your amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hulse. I haven't had any other indication of desire to speak, but Mike, you suggested you wanted to before. Are you
I'll be very brief, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Casey's amendment highlights the fact that in terms of dealing with possible accidents, oil spills, blowouts and so on, this country is woefully unprepared for that possibility. And this was brought home to me quite recently after being lobbied by conservationists and underwater divers who are deeply concerned about oil leaking from the wreck of the passenger liner Niagara off the Poor Knights Island. And it is estimated, though no one knows for sure, there's about 100 tonnes of oil, bunker oil, still in the wreck of that vessel. But this country does not have the means to even ascertain how much oil is in that wreck. And so, given the woeful unpreparedness of the maritime New Zealand, a lack of will to acquire the specialised vessels that could deal with such an accident, it reinforces that not only do we have the possibility of a major accident on the west coast, which is probably the most wildest ocean in the world, forget about the Gulf of Mexico, that's a lake in comparison. We also have problems on the east coast, relatively benign east coast of New Zealand, which we are totally unable to deal with even now. And that would be relatively easy to deal with compared to an oil rig blowout. So I certainly support the precautionary approach here. I support the comments of other members that it's time to walk the talk on climate change, and it is also time to exercise real prudence in trying to protect the critically endangered Maui dolphin.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Now, Councillor Casey, you have a right of reply.
Oh, Matt, before, Mr. Chairman, since my procedural motion
Are you seeking the
didn't succeed,
call?
I'd now like to make a contribution, if I may.
You are entitled to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before Councillor Casey, look, I'm probably going to sound like Darth Vader because I won't be supporting the amendment, because I do think that the economic benefit that is accrued to New Zealand, the wider population, is particularly important and seems to be totally ignored in this conversation. Especially when we look at the number of jobs that the oil industry provides. Nearly 8,000 full-time equivalents are provided by this industry. It is, as I said before in my question, it is the fourth largest export that this country has. Now, after we've killed this industry and after we've killed the dairy industry, we're probably not left with very much at all. And we'll just have an economy which is reliant on serving tourists as they come into the country. By air. By the aeroplanes that bring them here. Where it shall all be presumably still using oil, unless they go to the solar planes that we've seen, which take, unless it's sunny, won't get anywhere. So all the tourists will be coming to New Zealand, and all we want them to come to New Zealand, will all be coming by air, and they'll all be driven presumably by fossil fuels. Be a long time before we see planes that aren't driven by fossil fuels, and I certainly hope that we do get to see that. So it is the fourth largest earner of export dollars in New Zealand. The government alone in taxes collects $300 million every year. In royalties, another $400 million a year, so $750 million almost are generated by the oil industry. Where do you think that goes? Where do you think that money goes? Well, it goes to providing schools, it goes to providing healthcare, it provides all the other things that we take for granted. And so let's not forget that when you're going to vote down this, of course it'll have no impact on the government anyway. They'll just ignore it because they understand better than this council, presumably, how important this industry is to the country, and once you've finished with this industry, Councillor Casey, no doubt you'll be on to the dairy industry and you'll kill that as well. So I'm not going to be voting for this. I'm going to continue to support the very sensible submission that we have made for the past 3 years that we've all agreed on, and this council We now don't have an economic development, it's now set within the Environmental Committee. So I wouldn't expect that Councillor Hulse and her deputy, Councillor Filipaina, who are now promoting economic development, neither will they be voting for the amendment. They will continue to vote, as Councillor Hulse has in the past, for the sensible submissions that the officers have put in front of us. And so I expect that we should not support this amendment, and we will continue with the very sensible path that we have taken in the past, and give great consideration to the jobs. This is anti-jobs. This is anti-economic development, and Councillor Casey, I'm surprised that you would put this up, but perhaps not. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Newman, last speaker.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. And I want to commend those who have put forward the amendment for their passion, but I won't be supporting the amendment. I think that the submission that's been prepared by the officers is a balanced one. But I do want to come back to the point, and I think you foreshadowed this earlier, Your Worship, with respect to liability and the ability to respond to oil spills. And I raised the question to the officers with respect to Maritime New Zealand's preparedness. Your Worship, in a past life, I had responsibility for working with Maritime New Zealand. Treasury provided an indemnity to Maritime New Zealand for its oil response capacity, because post-RENA, the reserves that Maritime New Zealand had, which are of course reserves raised through a levy on the shipping industry, were exhausted. And now Maritime New Zealand, as I understand, their oil response fund is indemnified by the Treasury. So there is, I think, a reasonable concern there about the capacity of Maritime New Zealand to respond and to lead the oil response preparedness with operators. And I think that is something that does need to be emphasised in our submissions, because if we are going to have a precautionary response as opposed to a prohibitive submission, then we need to ensure that there is an adequate capacity on the part of Maritime New Zealand to respond to oil spills in the unfortunate situation where they might occur.